Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexei and today I have a special guest, Joshua Carney of MusicTechHelpGuy YouTube channel. Joshua is famous for making amazing tutorials on mixing, mastering and production in Logic Pro X. And today I have a huge honor to have Joshua on my YouTube channel. Let's start our interview.
Hey, Alexei. Hey, I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me. It's actually perfect timing because I've been installing my new home rig here and playing around with my lighting and camera setup. So it's perfect for first test run for new videos and trying to get the lights and the audio and the background and all that perfect. So yeah, man, I'm happy to be here.
So my first question is, what is your music background?
Yeah, my music background. I grew up in traditional music, so I started off playing piano and guitar as a kid. My parents bought me just a small format like Yamaha piano, and immediately I started sort of plunking around. And at first, I didn't really have any interest in like learning formal, how to read music or anything like that. I never took any like piano lessons, but I started plunking on the keys and I started hearing scales and chords and things like that in my head. And I had no clue what any of it was at the time. I was like 10 or 11, and I started making my own compositions and I started, playing with triads. I mean, I didn't even know what a triad was. I was just like, oh, this sounds good and this sounds good. And so it was purely by ear at first. Then later on, my dad taught me how to play a few chords on guitar. And then after that, I was in high school and middle school band and marching band. And I was even in marching band and concert band in college and played in the orchestra and all of that. After high school, I decided, maybe I want to be a music teacher. So I enrolled in a Bachelor of Music Education degree, which I abandoned after a few years for just a traditional BA in music. Went on to grad school, studied composition and theory and technology. And the whole time, even though I went to school for a traditional music degree, I started doing recording work. And the more recording work I did, the more I realized I can actually make money off of this. It was difficult to make money as a professional musician, but it wasn't like terribly difficult to make money as a recording engineer. And so I started recording friends' bands and my band, and I had even made like MIDI recordings before that, just playing around with some early sequencers when I was a teenager. And that's really what got me into music and audio production, was a need to make money. I was making money from recordings and not making money from playing, or not a lot of money from playing live. So yeah, that's really my musical background. I was a traditional musician, grew up in band and orchestra and marching band, went to school for music, and then ended up just going in a kind of a different direction. But I'm don't get me wrong, I don't regret getting a music degree by any means. The best thing I got from being formally trained in music was developing my ear. I took 4 semesters of ear training, probably 8 semesters of various different types of theory. So it really helps to, when you're fully immersed in it and you're forced to audibly, be able to hear different triads and chords and intervals and harmonies and scales and memorize and play all of these things. It really develops your ear in a musical way, but also in a critical listening sort of way. So I'm very, very happy that I have that background.
My second question is, how you became Music Tech Help Guy?
So the Music Tech Help Guy YouTube channel was born essentially out of necessity. It wasn't like I didn't mean to create a YouTube channel. I didn't mean to create a YouTube channel. I meant to create just some online videos for my students to find and use as an additional resource. So at the time when I first made the YouTube channel, I think it was 2011, 2012, I was teaching an advanced synthesis and sampling and sound design course. And people were in the class were struggling to keep up with some of the advanced sampling techniques. So what I did was I created some additional videos that they could go watch on their own time if they need to catch up on some of the material. So I was teaching college level classes, and it was a big help because some of the more complex topics, if you just show it once in class, they're not going to remember it. You know, they're not going to remember it when they're trying to repeat the same process a few weeks later on their projects. So I put up a couple videos. I think one of my first videos was it was Logic 9, and I think it had to do with the EXS24, how to create like velocity layers and round robin sampling. And I actually made a couple Ableton Live videos as well in the early days because we were using Ableton Live for sampling in class. And then I started getting followers that were not people in my class, right? And that just started growing and growing and growing. And then 1,000 views, 10,000 views. I was able to monetize the channel. And really my big break wasn't when Logic 10 originally came out back in, I think it was 2013. I did just an initial review video that got a ton of views. I mean, I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean for it to be that way. I didn't intend for it to be that way. But the day that Logic 10 came out for the first time, I real quickly hopped on there, did a quick just flyover of the features, uploaded it, and I think it got like, you know, way over 10,000 views, which is like abnormally high for anything I've had done up to that point. And then shortly after that, I did the very first Logic training video, I guess. It was basically Logic tutorial series #1, and that video now I think to this day has almost 2 million views or 1.5 million views. So it's still my #1 viewed video after, you know, 7, 8, almost 8 years now. So that's really how I got into it. And then it just, you know, it's all history from there. I've been uploading regularly, or as regularly as I can possibly upload since then. And it's blown up, and now I think we're up to about 250,000 subscribers. So it's been great.
My next question is how you became so good at Logic Pro X.
How did I become good at Logic? It's funny you say that, because I actually wasn't like most people, I wasn't always a Mac user. I was doing my first DAW was actually Cakewalk Sonar. No, it was Cakewalk Studio, or Cakewalk Home Studio. And then I made the jump up to Sonar, and then I made the jump to Cubase. And I was using a Windows machine that I had built for recording in college. And I was like 19, I think, 19, 20 maybe at the time. I was just starting to do some recording work for clients. Most of it, I didn't have a studio. I didn't have access to a studio other than at the college. But I was doing recording work at their homes. So I would just, bring my laptop, bring a couple compressors, a couple preamps, and an interface to their home. And I was recording, 8-channel drums and guitar amps and all that out of their home. So anyway, I was working with a band, and we were working in Cubase, recording the drummer. We had spent a couple days just trying to troubleshoot and get everything to sound right. And Cubase just kept crashing on me. And it's not like a, I'm not saying anything bad about Cubase. Cubase is great, but it just kept crashing on me. And it was the computer. It was the computer, for whatever reason, wasn't connecting with the hardware, correctly, blah, blah, blah. So I got so fed up with it. I ended the session. I said, all right, guys, I'm not going to charge you for today. Can we get together again in a couple days, and I'll fix this? And so what I ended up doing was I went out the next day and bought my first MacBook. And I started getting familiar with it. I noticed that Apple had their own DAW, Logic Pro, which I had heard about, but I hadn't really ever used it because I was never a Mac guy at the time. And so, I was using Pro Tools at the college, regularly. So I got Pro Tools, and then I bought Logic Pro, which I think was version 7 or something back then. And it came in this big box with a bunch of DVDs and a giant manual, and it was $800. And so it wasn't cheap. And I bought that, and I started getting familiar with it. And I was like, wow, there's not much of a learning curve here. It's really easy to use. And I started experimenting with the MIDI, and I was like, wow, you can do a lot here. And keep in mind, I was taking composition and songwriting lessons at the time. And it was really helpful for me to take my compositions from like Sibelius, just the notation, take the MIDI and move it over into Logic and rescore some of the sounds with better sounds. And so anyway, that's how I started getting familiar with Logic. I never like really read any books about it. I never got any formal training in it. I just kind of hopped into it. It functioned like any other DAW that I had used. I had already been using Pro Tools at the college. I already had a bunch of experience with Cubase, so everything sort of made sense. And I've always said this to this day. Logic is to me the least difficult DAW to jump into. I think Pro Tools is probably one of the hardest. Ableton Live, especially if you're not used to that workflow, but I feel like anyone can jump into Logic and learn how to record their music, the basics at least. So I never thought Logic was terribly difficult to use, and it's paid off, because now I teach Logic, and I've taught college level Logic and, music production courses, and obviously I'm doing this on YouTube as well. So that's my history with Logic. I started using it 15 years ago, and I've never looked back.
You made some courses on your YouTube channel about mixing rock and electronic dance music, but have you ever thought on making metal production course in Logic Pro X?
Ooh, heavy metal production. What's funny is a lot of people, because I have a Logic YouTube channel, a primarily Logic-based YouTube channel, people assume that I'm, like electronic music is my thing. But the funny thing is I grew up a rock and roll musician. I was in rock bands, and I was in heavy metal bands. And that's really where I sort of learned how to play music and write music and, play guitar. And I had a big, long, stint with my heavy metal band Right Stripped in college, and we played all over Michigan, all over Illinois, and we'd jump over to Chicago all the time and play there. And the guys actually came down to Florida, and we tracked a new album. I still haven't finished mastering it yet, but so I've had a long stint with those guys, and so heavy metal and rock music actually is my foundation. The reason why I haven't made any courses that are specifically focused on like hard rock and metal is because I feel like the market or YouTube is already oversaturated with things like that. There's all sorts of other channels like Glenn Fricker's channel and a few other ones that are a bunch of other ones really that are all focused on hard rock and metal. And I think the reason why it's that way is I think inherently your audio engineering types tend to be more of the rock and metal musicians. And I've always found that metal musicians tend to be a little bit more of like DIYers, do-it-yourselfers than maybe people in other genres. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing there, but I've always found that metal musicians are more do-it-yourselfers. They want to learn how to, instead of paying someone to do it, they want to do it themselves. They want to learn how to do it themselves. And so that's why I think there's such a large volume of content out there already aimed at metal production. It's certainly something that I'm not saying I wouldn't do it in the future. If I do it though, I want to do it the right way. Like I want to do it really, really the right way, which takes a lot of work and energy and time and money and studio time and paying a video guy, to follow me around. And So it's not super easy to do, but it's definitely something I've thought about doing. I just if I'm going to put something out there like that, I want it to be as good, if not better, than what's already out there. So that's partly why I haven't done anything specifically with metal.
My next question is, how do you think should you get a degree to become a good sound engineer nowadays?
Whether or not to get a degree in audio production or music production is a really difficult subject because I can tell you my experience with college and here in the U.S. I mean, in the U.S., most colleges are not free. You have to pay for them, which usually either requires getting a scholarship, which not everyone's going to get, or you can, you can get student loans like I did. And, my experience was getting a bachelor's and master's degree, going to school for 7 years. It took me 5 years to finish my bachelor's, 2 years to finish my master's. And by the time I was done, I had like $90,000 in student loan debt. So, what I tell people is if you get student loans, like really be smart about it. Live with roommates, get the cheapest apartment you can, get a part-time job, get a full-time job, If I could do it all over again, I probably would have gotten an audio production degree or maybe found a school that I could major in music, but then like maybe minor in music technology or audio or something along those lines. It's just where I was at the time and the schools that were around me they didn't offer any like music technology degrees. And I really wasn't, I wasn't interested in like leaving the area that I was in. Like I wasn't interested in leaving the state at the time. So that's why I kind of went the route that I did. But what I tell people is if you can afford it, if you can afford to go to school for audio, it certainly helps. It helps to have professional training and intern at a real studio. And there's so much you learn just from like setting up a session, recording an entire band, editing the entire session, mixing everything, mastering it, and finishing a project. There's so much that you learn. And then after you do that, you look at it in retrospect and you're like, I could have done a lot of things differently here. I made a lot of mistakes. I would fix this, and this. And your brain starts, critically thinking and thinking about things that you'd change. And then so you change it for the next time. And then the same thing happens. And it's difficult to get a kickstart on that process of constantly kind of moving up and learning without having the resources available to do that. When I taught audio production courses in college, we had session recording classes, recording techniques classes. These are all things that help to expedite the students' knowledge and also expedite their experience. So they're not having to start from square one with zero knowledge and then hope to go somewhere with that. So it's certainly helpful. I would never say that it's not helpful. It's definitely helpful to get a degree in audio. But it can be expensive, especially if you live in a country where college is not included with your taxes. And you have to think about, your personal situation, like when I got out of college, I was paying $800 a month on my student loans every single month. And I've been doing that since I graduated from college, so basically for 10 years, over 10 years, I've been paying $800 a month on those damn student loans. And, if you want to be in debt until you're 50 with student loans and you have a way to pay for that, or you have the drive to make sure that you can pay for that, great, or if you already have a scholarship, maybe your parents, set aside tuition money for you. If you have the means to do it, I'd say go do it. What I will say on the flip side, though, is there are some great online resources that do cost money, or some are free, some do cost money, and you really can learn a lot online. But really, like I said before, the best experience you're going to get is just going out and starting a project and building it from the ground up and finishing that project, and then just continually doing that, because you learn something about yourself and you learn about any mistakes you might make in the production process, and you try to fix that the next time around. So that's really the number one thing, you can do. But there's little things like the theory of everything, how to mic up, recording techniques, how to mic up a drum set, how to mic up a guitar cab, how to properly record vocals, how to properly record all these different types of instruments, how to gain stage and set levels, how to use a compressor, how to use an EQ. These are all things that are a little more technical, and you kind of need that hands-on and that sort of over-the-shoulder teacher experience where they can guide you so that you don't make the mistakes. And so when you go into your first recording project, you already know a bit. You're already a step above the guy that doesn't know anything. So again, audio colleges, very useful, very a great thing if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, look for some online resources.
My next question is, do you use Logic Stack guitar amps or guitar pedals in rock or metal production?
Logic has a bit of a problem with their fan base, I guess. Their users are kind of split. From the comments I see, you've got your electronic producer types, and you've got your rock, at-home rock musicians. And one of the things about Logic that people forget is it started as a MIDI workstation, and I feel like Apple's sort of focus seems to be more in the direction of electronic music. That's why they're adding all these new features like live loops and the step sequencer, and they just added Logic 10.6 earlier this week, where they added some control for Launchpad and iPad. And so I definitely feel like Logic is kind of lacking in the rock, production department. I'd like to see some new guitar amps. I'd like to see some new tools that are made more for rock musicians. I'd love to see an update to Amp Designer where there's like an option where you can drag and drop your own IR into Amp Designer. That'd be great. You just go online, find whatever cab and mic model you want, and just drop that in. And you can use their cab, their amp sims, but use a third party cab IR. That would be great. I'd love to see them add some additional amps that were more focused on rock and metal. I'd love to see like a 5150 clone, a Soldano clone. And Apple has the means to do it. They certainly have the means to do it. It's no stretch of the imagination to hope that they would update Amp Designer someday. And Apple's done this before, like they did with Alchemy and Camel Audio. Alchemy is not a new instrument. It's been around for a while. Apple just bought it from Camel Audio and turned it into their own thing. What if Apple bought Bias Amp, you know what I mean? Or bought one of these other smaller companies and took it, improved it, and then made it part of Logic. I'd love to see something like that. I mean, I don't want people to lose their favorite, plug-in, but I'm saying Apple has the ability to do it. So I'm hoping in whatever the next update we get, whenever that is, 10.7 or whatever it ends up being, I'd like to see them maybe streamline some of their editing tools. I'd like to see them add some new pedals and amps that were more focused on modern rock and metal. I'd love to see some drum kits that are maybe a little bit more in line with what people are using nowadays for modern rock and metal. Amp Designer, I don't really use it that much. I'll use it for clean tones, but most of the time what I'll do is I'll just record my DI parts and I'll use like Bias Amp. And sometimes I will use Amp Designer, but I'm only using the amp sim as a placeholder. I'm not using the amp sim, for the final recording. Usually what I'll do is use it as a placeholder just for the tone. Then I'll edit everything the way I want it edited. and then I'll either, send it through some other amp sim, or usually what I'll do is I'll go up to the studio and use our Kemper and reamp it with the Kemper, or just reamp it with a real amp. I've got a great setup here at home where in the other room, I've got my Hughes and Kettner amp, and I'll just send the signal out of Logic into a reamp box into the amp, put a couple mics up on it, and then record that back into Logic. So, I use it as more of a placeholder, just for recording. I don't really like using it for like full productions. So Logic definitely needs to step up their game in terms of their recording production techniques. I'd love to see them, like I said, I'd love to see them streamline their editing and recording workflow a bit better. Not saying it doesn't work good now, it does, but especially if you come from the Pro Tools world, it's a little difficult to learn how to work with Logic's editing tools, and as opposed to the way something like Pro Tools works. So they definitely should step up their game in the next update.
And my final question is, after having such a big experience in production and working with Logic Pro X, is there anything you want to learn to apply into your mixing and mastering process?
Oh man, yeah. I'm always learning new things. I'm learning new things from other musicians, from other engineers, sometimes I'm learning old techniques that I'd never ever used before. Techniques that have been around for a while. The main thing I wish I could learn more of, that I struggle with, is like understanding audio electronics better. Like, I know enough to solder a patch bay. I know enough to like solder a cable, fix gear, replace components, things like that. I'm pretty good at the soldering end of things. What I don't quite understand is like the electronics components signal flow, like how analog signal processing works, from a circuit standpoint, like being able to just open up a piece of gear and be like, oh, that does that and that does that. And I know this probably, it's not like directly affecting like my mixing and mastering process. But what it is doing is could allow me to build my own equipment, which I've always wanted to do. And I have done a bit of it, I mean, you can easily buy like a kit and make a kit compressor or EQ or whatever. But that's just soldering. Like, you don't actually have to understand the signal flow of how things work to just solder a bunch of components onto a PCB. That's relatively easy. But one of the first like pieces of equipment that I made myself, I made a pair of ribbon mics a while back, and I ended up blowing the ribbons in both of the mics. But a ribbon mic is really simple. It's a ribbon motor, some wires, a ribbon microphone transformer, and then an XLR jack. That's it. There's really nothing else to it. And I really wish I understood a deeper understanding of component electronics. And I realize that's not necessarily like a mixing and mastering thing, but that's like one thing in the industry I wish I knew more about. That and acoustics, room acoustics is a big one. I wish I knew everything that about room acoustics like an acoustician would know. If I need to go into a space like my office here in my house and acoustically treat everything the right way, and that's something I know the basics. I know enough to get by. I know enough to hang, to know where I need to hang certain panels and where things need to go. But there's a whole other level of complexity to room acoustics, like different absorption coefficients and different ways to put different amounts of space between, behind panels, and how to angle a wall, and things like that. So there's all sorts of really complex things with room acoustics that I wish I understood better. Like I said, I know enough to get by, in both of these topics, but those are probably the main two topics, the main two things in audio production in general that I wish I knew more of.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for such a great interview. It's a huge pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, man, it's been great chatting with you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun. So thanks a bunch, and wish you well, and I'll see you next time.
Please check out Music Tech Help Guy YouTube channel, and see you next time.